See this right here? This is the look of disappointment. Question, what's the best size of container for potatoes? It's a question that I didn't know the answer to, but was really curious to get to know and understand a bit more. So what did I do? Can you guess it yet? Can you guess it? Can you guess it? I started an experiment. So what we're going to go through today is the experiment that I ran. Then we're going to harvest up all these potatoes that I have in front of me, weigh them, and make a couple of observations. But what on earth was the experiment that I ran? Well, back on April 2nd, I kicked off an experiment using 3-gallon grow bags, 5-gallon grow bags, 10-gallon grow bags, and a raised bed to begin to understand what is the most optimal size of container or grow bag to be growing potatoes. And so with the grow bags on hand, the first thing that I did was begin to fill them with what my current favorite soil blend is, which is 75% compost and 25% vermiculite. Next, I added 1 handful of our worm castings and 1 tablespoon of our 4-4-4 superfood to each of the containers. Potatoes are really big eaters, so I wanted to make sure that they had lots and lots of nutrition. Then I placed 1 potato into each of the bags about 2 inches from the bottom, so really nice and deep. And on top of that, the variety that I'm growing here is Warba potatoes, which is a small to medium-sized potato and a bit of an earlier season harvest. And with the seed potatoes in, I then filled each of the grow bags up to the top of the bag. So as much soil as they could handle, I filled them up with. And lastly, I top dressed with an additional 1 handful of worm castings and 1 tablespoon of superfood. And on top of this, I then did the exact same thing with 3 potatoes in a raised bed. And the reason why I'm doing 3 potatoes is that I don't want a sample size of 1. So we've got 3 potatoes going in each of the different size of grow bags and raised bed. And so from there, the beauty of potatoes is that they're really straightforward. So I allowed them just to hang out in the soil and begin to grow. Now, what I did do was that the moment that they began to poke through the surface, I held them up. And so what this consisted of was adding as much compost onto the top of the respective container that they are in. And what that also meant was that the 3-gallon ones, because it's a smaller area, I wasn't able to add as much compost as, say, the 5-gallon or the 10-gallon or the raised bed. And so it's gonna be really interesting to see what that might result in terms of the overall production within each of the grow bags. And so it is now July 27th, and as we can see here, these babies are all done growing. I like to wait for these babies to basically completely die off. The ones in the raised bed, they're still a little bit alive, but I think it's best that we harvest all of them right now in order to begin getting into our results. And so what I wanna do next is take these over to the wheelbarrow in the back, where we're gonna go through size by side, dumping them out, seeing what the harvest is, weighing them, and then making a couple of observations. But just before we do that, if you're enjoying the video thus far, then I encourage you to subscribe to our channel here, because we put out new videos just like this one every single week to be taking as much of the guesswork out of gardening as possible for you, and ultimately allowing you to enjoy your time in the garden even more. So I want to start heading over there, and as we do that, I am anticipating or hypothesizing a very modest harvest. And the reason for that is because none of these plants put on tons of foliage growth over the course of the season. And a lot of the other earlier crops that I've been harvesting have been much smaller due to the really cold spring that we went through there. So when we look at the potatoes that are growing in my garden right now, I think that's gonna be a much larger harvest a little bit later on in the summer. But nonetheless, I think that we're gonna get some really interesting results this evening in terms of how each of them grew, depending on the size of bag that they were in. And so to get started on this, I wanna go ahead and dive into the 3-gallon bags. Alrighty, and here we go. A couple months of work. Let's see what we got. Whoa, that's a nice start. Hey. All right, on to the next 3-gallon. Bag number 3. Okay. All right, let's get these on the scale now. All right, I've got the scale zeroed out, so let's pop them in. And we're looking at 394 grams. So not too bad for the 3-gallon bags, but let's grab the 5-gallon bags now. Dump this one straight away here. And now I'd expect more on these ones just due to having more size in there, but let's see. I don't actually see really any yet. Only 2 little tiny ones there. Oh, there's a third one. Well, that was a very underwhelming first bag. Let's see if the second's any better. There's one already. Well, that also wasn't great, so the 3-gallon bag might actually end up being better than the 5-gallon in this one. That's it. All right, I got the scale zeroed out. Let's get these babies in here, and that comes out to 369. 369, Little John song. So also very sub-modest, I would even put it as. But let's move on to the 10 gallons and see if those are any better. Whoa, 10 gallons, here we go. I'm not seeing a lot of potatoes. On to our third and final bag. Hey buddies. Folks, the stoke is not high. Alrighty, the scale is zeroed out. Let's get these babies in there. And we are at 627. Alrighty, now let's wrap up by doing the raised bed. But folks, the stoke is not high right now. We'll talk about that in a second. Alrighty, let's see how we've done in the raised bed here. A couple popping off there. We're gonna have to dig through this a little bit here. Couple nice ones there. Let's dig into the second one now. Yank that out. That one might have yielded a whopping 1 potato. Can't even speak. Alrighty, let's dive into the third one here. Alright, let's weigh these. The scale's not even working now. Zeroed out. Here we go. $659. See this right here? This is the look of disappointment. This is not what I was, I guess, hoping for this evening. And I think the word that's like coming to mind for me is inconclusive, or in other words, like based on how this experiment has unfolded, I don't feel convinced in the results yet that I've got the answer to what is the best or the right size of grow bag or container to be growing potatoes in. And so usually I would be sharing some observations at this point, but again, I don't really think that that is the place for it, just based on how the experiment went and how modest the results were. With that said, you know, the 10-gallon grow bag and the raised bed, they still were basically double what the other 3-gallon and 5-gallon grow bags yielded. So there is something kind of interesting there. But again, I want to do this experiment again and try and get better results on it. And so I think the reason why I'm a little bit like defeated or disappointed is because I would design this experiment in a very similar way. I would use same size grow bags. I'd probably add a 20-gallon in. I'm fine with the potato variety that we went with. I'm fine with the soil. I'm fine with what we fed them. And I know that that soil and the feeding that we went with in terms of worm castings and superfood works really well, because last year in a raised bed from 2 potatoes, I got 3,400 grams, which is way more than what we're looking at today here. So the biggest thing that, you know, kind of pops out to me has been just the challenging spring that we've had. We had a really cold April, a really cold May, a really cold June, and July's finally been nice. And when we think about these potatoes behind me here, they were growing in April, they were growing in May, they were growing in June, and they were finishing in July. So 75% of their total growing time was in just like really poor conditions. And so that kind of like disappointment on my end is more from a place or perspective that there isn't enough days left in the calendar year for me to start that experiment over right now to get the results that I'm curious and interested to see, which means that I have to wait until next year in order to kick it off again, at which point I'll probably kick it off around like May 15th and let it run all through the peak of summer to see what the results are. So yeah, you know, not what I was hoping for this evening. Somewhat interesting that the 10-gallon and the raised bed were double the smaller grow bags. But yeah, not the results that I was hoping for. If any of you have been growing potatoes this year and have had challenging challenging spring and summer, let me know. I'd be curious to hear how the harvests have been for you thus far. Or if you have lots of experience growing potatoes and as you've kind of seen what the different pieces are of this experiment and you have any ideas in terms of what I could have done differently in order to get better results, I'd be super keen to hear in the comments as well. But other than that, folks, that's all that I got to share here for this evening. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Other than that, catch you on the next video. See you soon.